After the sudden departure of Chuks and Nenwa, Adekunle and Babatunde were feeling on top of the world. They had been the eyes and ears of Madam Busy, feeding her information that allowed them to rise in the office. With Chuks and Nenwa out of the picture, they were sure their positions were secure. But they were wrong. As a way to solidify their control, Adekunle and Babatunde decided to bring in Itam, a quiet but sharp observer, and Ejiro, a charismatic and charming individual, quickly realized the opportunity they had in front of them. Adekunle and Babatunde, once the favored spies, were now vulnerable. They had grown overconfident, and Madam Busy, though still under their influence, was starting to look for new faces to replace them. Itam and Ejiro knew this was their chance. They played their cards carefully, learning the ins and outs of the office and quickly gaining Madam Busy's trust. They fed her the right stories, made sure to always agree with her, and, most importantly, never questioned her authority. Their loyalty to Madam Busy was obvious, and she was beginning to appreciate them more than Adekunle and Babatunde. At first, Adekunle and Babatunde were content to let Itam and Ejiro work alongside them. But soon, they began to feel a shift. Madam Busy was paying more attention to the new recruits, showering them with praise while dismissing Adekunle and Babatunde's suggestions. The whisper started, and it wasn't long before Madam Busy started questioning the two old spies' loyalty. As the days passed, the dynamic shifted, and Adekunle and Babatunde were left in the shadows, no longer in favor with the boss. Itam and Ejiro had effectively replaced them. What really stung, though, was when Itam and Ejiro began leaking their secrets to Madam Busy. The very things they had shared with the new recruits, thinking they were loyal allies, were now being used against them. It wasn't just information, it was betrayal. Itam and Ejiro revealed how Adekunle and Babatunde had manipulated Madam Busy into making decisions that favored them. They spilled the details about how the two had used her as a pawn to maintain their control over the office. Suddenly, Madam Busy's perception of Adekunle and Babatunde shifted. Madam Busy was furious. She no longer saw them as valuable allies, and she no longer trusted their judgment. When Adekunle tried to speak up in a meeting, she dismissed him without a second thought. When Babatunde suggested a new initiative, she gave him a cold stare and ignored his proposal. It was clear that their reign was over. Adekunle and Babatunde, once powerful and feared, had now been dethroned. The once favorite spies were now left to watch from the sidelines as Itam and Ejiro took the lead, sitting in the same seat of influence they once held. Madam Busy had no respect left for them. She had no use for their opinions, and her eyes were now set firmly on the new duo. What made the betrayal even more cutting was how Itam and Ejiro managed to gain Madam Busy's favor in a way Adekunle and Babatunde never had. They were loyal, strategic, and in sync with Madam Busy's desires. They did not question her authority, they simply played the game better. As Adekunle and Babatunde sat together, realizing they were no longer in Madam Busy's good books, they began to discuss their next move. They were on the verge of losing everything, but neither of them knew how far Itam and Ejiro would go to secure their positions. Would Adekunle and Babatunde fight back, or would they continue to watch as their new colleagues, to whom they gave jobs, try to take their job positions? But the biggest question remained, who else would be next? Would Madam Busy turn on Itam and Ejiro, or were they her new loyal lieutenants? What do you think will happen next? Will Adekunle and Babatunde get revenge, or will they be forced to accept their downfall? Do you think Itam and Ejiro will stay in Madam Busy's favor, or will they too fall from grace? Don't forget to subscribe and share. What are your thoughts on this corporate game? Let us know in the comments below.